Hi, everyone. Welcome to Poetry and Talk. Poetry and Talk is a new online interviewing platform for poets to share their poetry, background, and inspiration. We're wishing everyone happy holidays, and we hope your holiday season is a most joyous one for you and for your loved ones. Thank you so much for checking in with us and for watching today. We have a new guest poet to introduce you to. We hope you stay connected with us on our social media, on Poetry and Talk's YouTube channel, and also on our Facebook page, Poetry and Talk. Please subscribe, like, and share. We appreciate your support. I'm Leslie Sue, the host for Poetry and Talk. And again, thank you so much for watching today. I'd like to introduce and welcome our guest poet for today, Sara Altman. Sara, welcome.
Hello.
Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Sara, we have our customary opening for Poetry and Talk, where we have our guest poet give a little brief introduction to a poem and then read it. So if you're all set, we're ready.
So I should give an introduction before reading it?
If you'd like to just, set it up for us, or if you
Sure.
want to read it, it's up to you.
Okay, well, this poem it's very heavy in sort of, to me, a visual. It's almost like a visual impression rather than a story, even though it does have a sequence of events. When I think of the poem, when I close my eyes and think of this poem, I just think of like a very impressionistic and vivid colors and flashes, and not necessarily a linear, concrete storyline, but it's very that's the sense I get, and it's very sort of, you'll see when I read it anyway. So I'm gonna read it now. Is that good?
Absolutely.
Okay. Passing away. Blue knotted ropes glide upon glints of sparks and shuffled light. Sand sifts fast through broken hourglass. Instead of birdsong, I hear the chaotic barking of seals. Remember the feeling of sea breeze on my skin. Heaven and earth arose out of primordial ooze. When humanity emerged, time was tethered, bound, and locked. Scoundrels stole clouds, stakeholders claimed the sun, scapegoats hung in the wind. This shadowy reaper drifts in dedicated pursuit as fire's fury stings the flesh and temperatures climb in catastrophic measures. Soon, water will rise as high as the sky, wrap its molecules around our necks, and force us back into oblivion.
I really like that, Sara. Before you dive into that, I like that you set that up because I really get this kind of like weaving in and out of time, this very kind of like transcendental quality. And I like how you said in the beginning, non-linear. So we'd love for you to share with us, what is this all about and what does this poem mean to you?
It definitely is about the passage of time. The way that it came to me, it came and it sort of wrote itself. I mean, I wasn't intending to write about this. It just started with these fantastic sort of images. I remember I started to write the first line, blue knotted ropes glide upon. I mean, that doesn't really make much sense, but the words just came like glints of sparks and shuffled light. It's more of a vision, it's more of a vision. And then the impression of time, like sand sifts fast through broken hourglass. I guess the brokenness is like our impression of time it's subjective. It can never be one way. So I mean, that just occurred to me now. So there's this disorientation in the poem, like expecting to hear, instead of birdsong, I hear the chaotic barking of seals. That's actually in my own life. It sort of goes back. I used to live on the West Coast and I lived in Santa Cruz, and I was close enough to the Pacific Ocean. I could hear the seals making that noise. I can't make it, but it's a funny noise. Like you know what I'm talking about, right? Like I can't make it. But so I'd hear it from my bedroom, and it's sort of that disorientation of within your own life. Even one experience you might have had at one time is like worlds away from another. So it's like, maybe a springtime in New York, you hear bird song, but like another in California in the winter, you're hearing seals. It's sort of that disorientation. And then I had the memory of the sea breeze on my skin. And then it goes to the more universal, heaven and earth arose out of primordial ooze. So this is it's sort of like a universal history of the universe. Like so first it was from nothing, but when humanity emerged, time was tethered, bound, and locked. So this sense of like humans bringing almost limitation or definition to things, and then it's almost like that perfect nature, the objective nature was almost corruptive. Like I see scoundrels stole clouds, stakeholders claimed the sun, like people were out for self-interest. There's scoundrels, like they're taking clouds. That's just a ridiculous statement, because you can't steal clouds, but clouds are nature. It's something you can't touch, but humans are really corrupt in that they were twisting nature, and then scapegoats hung in the wind. So there's the whole theory of like strongness and weakness, and certain people preying on other people. And then I brought it to the whole idea of death. So the shadowy reaper, it's like the grim reaper, drifts in dedicated pursuit as fire's fury stings the flesh and temperatures climb in catastrophic measures. So that's just a reference to global warming and the fact that it's killing us. So it's in the shadowy reaper is in dedicated pursuit, and the global warming is it sounds like a very intentional process of, he's out for blood, and then I made it at the end. There's almost a reassurance. For me, life is so many things. It's like a crystal, and it shines so many different ways, and sometimes it's really amazing, but sometimes it's really, really difficult. And so in those times I always remind myself how fleeting it is. So it's sort of supposed to be a comforting thing here. I say, soon water will rise as high as the sky, wrap its molecules around our necks, and force us back into oblivion. Sort of puts us back in proper view of we're not all we think we are. We're just this little glint in the history of everything, and we're going to go back from where we came, which is nothing. And then I said around our necks because it was during the Black Lives Matter, so I had that idea in my head. It's sort of a violent idea, but it's reassuring, and it's inevitable.
I love all this territory that you're covering, and I love your vivid imagination and the way that you present this, and almost like this dreamy visual, like, in some other like time space, so to speak. Now, yes, Sara, does this whole kind of orientation, is this kind of indicative to the way that you see things, kind of like a personal philosophy, so to speak?
I wish I was that evolved, that I traveled around with that consciousness, but it's more, I think, something I reflect on rather than something that I always, because I get easily, I easily get affected by little things in my day, or things upset me. So I don't really have a fatalistic attitude, or I don't have a big perspective when little things happen, but it's almost like that's why when I like to reflect on things like this, because it is comforting to me that actually this is really the larger picture.
How is it comforting?
Well, because I guess it's comforting when you look at, I just feel that there's a lot of struggle in being human, and there's a lot of stuff that's asked of us, and there's a lot of like growing is pretty necessary, and it's not always comfortable. And um the fact that it doesn't last forever is almost comforting, because I really wouldn't want to live forever. It's tiring, I know the circles I'd have under my eyes after 50,000 years. It's just yeah, so I see it as, just give it your best shot kind of thing, and while we're here, and get the wisdom that you can accrue, but there will be an end point. It kind of puts it in perspective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have a very interesting, very creative, as I said, vivid imagination, but you have a very concrete, right here also, you kind of seem to balance the linear and the non-linear, so to speak.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us about your poetry. Is this particular style sort of descriptive of your other poetry? Is this kind of like a style that you write in?
This is a very serious poem. I have different poems. I would say it has a similar rhythm to my other poems. I tend to write with an innate sense of like syllables, or that it just kind of goes like, I have an instinct to, that sounds right, or that sounds right. It's I don't think my poetry, yeah, that I don't even know what more to say about it, but there's a musicality to it. The lines kind of go together, and then did it. It's like it kind of has like measures, and it's musical.
Oh,
So in that way, yes.
mm-hmm. So
And then
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
No, so that was interesting, that musical reference. So it sounds like during the process and perhaps during the editing, your intuition guides you in terms of the rhythmic quality of it. Like, yes, that feels right in terms of the rhythm. So that kind of guides you in terms of like, the completion of the poem in terms of the musical aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I feel fortunate about that. It's very instinctive for me. That's why when I read the next one, you can hear it more, because the poem is a little bit simpler, so you can hear it, the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
Should I read it?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. Okay, it's called Such is the Night. Okay. Crickets chirp in metered time, cradling me in their song. As the hours shed darkness, the crickets breathe silence. A musical conductor would beam if his orchestra could glean a tenth of their accuracy and grace. Human beings blindly travel, wreaking havoc in fits of fury. Crickets cling to nature's slant, masters of form and function.
Mm-hmm. I like that. It's almost like you captured this moment in time of night, and now we get to relive it through your poem.
Thank you. That's what I was sitting on the couch at my family's lake house, and the screen was open in the summer, and I heard the crickets, and that's exactly what it was. It was silent, and we were in a chorus, and it just, I was in a very peaceful state there, because it doesn't have a lot of technology, distractions, or people, and I was by myself, and just moved to write that poem. So that's exactly what it was. It was that moment. So I'm happy that you could detect that.
Mm-hmm. And you incorporate the senses a lot in your poetry as well, kind of combining all of them, or at least incorporating some of them.
Oh, like probably. I never thought about it, but it seems that way. Like, you mean the five senses and like the imagery?
Mm-hmm.
It seems like it. And I also have an sort of like the words. So a lot of, if I'm lucky, they'll guide me. I feel lucky because like a musical conductor would beam if his orchestra could glean a tenth of their accuracy and grace. Like, it's so like concise, it all kind of fits together, and you still had a nice rhyme there. That's not something I labor over. I feel pretty lucky that sometimes it's just, that's what I was going to mention too. Sometimes poetry is just magical, and it's like you're almost a vessel, and it just comes through you. And yeah,
Yeah,
that's that.
yeah, absolutely, Sarah. I'm so glad you mentioned that. That's really beautiful. So when you are actually in the creative process, and we can kind of tap into that for just a moment. So being that pure vessel to allow whatever is going to come through, do you have any kind of process or kind of protocol, so to speak, to kind of get in that space? Do you kind of naturally move into it? Do you kind of do things to kind of elicit it and bring it out?
Yeah, it's funny because it's different than it used to be. I used to when I would write out of strong emotion, and it was almost like it was like a therapy, like I had to get it out, and it was to make sense of what was inside. But now I write more uh, about, it's not like that. I guess it varies. A lot of times I just sit down and have the intention to write a poem, and sometimes it may be easier than other times. Sometimes I am sort of feel like I'm whittling a poem out of something, and other times it's like the poem is just filling me, like I'm the vessel. So it kind of depends. But I mean, I've written poems like listening to a song, and then sort of the song inspires me to write about that. Or let's see. But a lot of times it just starts with a line. It's not even a full idea. And then I am working more on bringing the reader with me, because sometimes I can write these, like I get carried away in the images, and I could leave the reader confused. So I guess it's important to write for yourself, but it's also good to think, okay, how is this going to come across, you know? So to have both, and not everything I write is going to be for a reader, because it's also good to let myself just write, because it's a you don't want to stifle your creativity, and you don't know what it's going to be until it comes. So I guess it's all just a discovery and practice.
Mhm. Yes. I have a question for you, Sarah. You kind of touched upon something that I thought was interesting. It sounds like when you first were writing poetry, or maybe not first, but you went through kind of like a season, so to speak, of where poetry was kind of healing for you. You were kind of exploring emotions that were inside. And you're saying that that was kind of then, but now it's kind of evolved to a completely different kind of like this whole nonlinear, a little bit more dreamy, very visual, very flowy kind of thing. Is that correct?
Hmm.
Mhm. And when did you start to write poetry? Can you get a little bit into the origins of how it all began for you?
Well, actually, my mom is a creative, or she's retired, but she was a creative writing professor at a community college. So she took me to, her students had like a final day where they shared all their creative writing pieces. And I talked to her. She said she thinks I was about 10. And I just remember it was awesome. Like I just felt, I was so moved by the energy, and the people were so happy, and everybody sharing, and just opening up and appreciating each other and the work itself. And and then from there, sometimes when I got older, I would read her students' papers. Like I remember getting really into this one girl's work, and I was really impressed with her. I remember seeing her perform it, and she was, it was one of those cases where often people will transform traumatic experiences into art, and she was so empowered, and she had such command of the language, and she had such a presence that it was just really inspiring, and I thought she was so cool. Um, and it just moved me, like it stirred me, like I felt inside, like that's what poetry can do. It's like it's amazing because it's short. It's usually pretty short, but somehow it packs this experience, whether it's the one that the poet wanted you to have or if it's a completely different one. For me, it was just it could be very profound with certain poems, and it's not something I ever wanted to like give up. You know, I always had that connection like to poetry.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. So there
and
are,
then and then like I guess I started journaling through school, so that was a lot of learning like how writing can like what place writing could have in my life, and what it sort of I got so much out of it. It did a lot for me, and it really developed my relationship with myself, and it helped me get to know myself. And especially being young at that point, I think the poetry part of it came later because my mind was still very little rational. So, um, but there were definitely glimpses of it, you know. Um, but that's how I think it started.
glimpses, like glimpses, meaning that the poetry could be more than what you were experiencing then. Is that what you mean by a
Well,
glimpse?
there were glimpses, like there were little like I almost wrote like a little poem in there. Like you could identify it later as a poem, you know, but it wasn't so sophisticated because I was very young and I was thinking very concretely about things.
Mm-hmm. And then you kind of shifted a little bit more abstract type of
And then I shifted to then like emotions and processing emotions. I sort of would take the emotional feeling and then make it an abstract experience and then create something from that. So sometimes it would make, so sometimes like, I don't know. Does it, I don't know what to say about it. It's hard to explain, but when you write, it was just a great way to process something that isn't rational because feelings, you know, it's like that's what it is. It's like your dreams, your feelings, your impressions. We live in a world where everybody wants to say, but wait, what is the answer? What are you trying to say? But it's actually, there's so many grays. So poetry was a way to experience the complexity of myself growing up and of the world that was not always recognized by the actual world. So it was very validating.
That was very beautifully expressed. It was almost like you found this like almost like multifaceted part of yourself. It wasn't this, it wasn't that, it was all that's kind of like in between. And poetry, it sounds like that's what opened you up to actually kind of almost in a tangible way experiencing yourself as that.
Yeah, just allowing yourself to experience, and also just allowing yourself to experience things rather than cut them off, because you know, we live in a culture where a lot of things are not acceptable. Like people don't like to see you angry. People don't want to see you sad. But if it's your own writing, and it's just great to let yourself go through everything. I think it's just a great way to grow and process and for and realize things.
Mm-hmm. What kind of advice would you have, Sarah, for someone who doesn't necessarily embrace those emotions? Like perhaps they recognize the emotions that they're feeling, and like you were saying, in some societal norms, you know, they don't want to see somebody angry or somebody feeling this or somebody feeling that. You seem to embrace it. You're very open to it. You explore it in your poetry. Someone that's maybe your age or just in general, how would you advise them to kind of gently kind of push them and say, look, hey, go ahead and explore that. Don't, you know, don't stifle it.
Hmm. I think also because those things will affect you if you don't process them. It's like a snowball that's going to get bigger and bigger. unless you're one of those people that's able to just function like half dimensional, but why would you want to be like that? So I would say just take a breath, take a little bit at a time, notice, introspect how you're feeling, and that your feelings are valid. Because I don't know, we just live in a culture that we're told that what we're feeling isn't right. We shouldn't feel that way a lot of times, and it's just because people haven't introspected in themselves, and so they're afraid of it in others. And just accept it, because all it's going to do is make you a more whole person.
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, do you think that it's a poet's job, and I want to use the word job very, very loosely, but do you think that it's a poet's job to kind of bring these areas out and more in society to kind of like highlight them, so to speak, through their poetry, through their voice and whatnot?
That's funny. I think it's I think it's hard to say job, but because everybody has their own perceptual calling, and I'm sure there's so many people that are aware of realms that I'm not aware of at all. So for me, this is the case. Um, but I think it's different for everyone. I think there are poets that probably write more mathematically or more description oriented, or more just different layers, not necessarily about with the emotions, but I think it is the poet's that the poet serves to bring out and look at things that other people either take for granted or um yeah, just take for granted and don't consider. They just accept it for how it is and don't think it could be different when it could be different.
Mhm. Yes, thank you for sharing that, Sarah. I have a question also in terms of your writing in 2020 with the pandemic and everything going on. Has it been kind of a prolific time of writing for you? Has it been the opposite? How has the poetry gone in terms of this year?
Well, for me, it's been a huge growth spurt, because I actually um I started to go to therapy, and my therapist, I found out, I looked her up. On the first meeting, it was funny. I said something that was a reference to an old British literature poem about the albatross, and she got it. And I'm like, you know that? And then I looked her up. Turns out she's like a Polish poet. So it sort of moved something in me, because I always wrote poetry from time to time, but never like now. It's my mission. It's one of my main focuses. And I'm writing and I'm submitting, and I share my poems with her. And it's just been inspiring to see somebody who actually has been successful in the realm of poetry. And it made me think maybe I could too. And so it's great to have her, because then it motivates me to write. So I have someone I always share with my mom too. And then I can also share with her. And yeah, and I've been going through, I like the one thing I have to say is, of course, I don't like the fact that our country is suffering, but the one thing, the pandemic, the gift that it brings us is sort of the gift of introspection. Like, everybody is always seems like they look outside themselves to get their needs met, and now we're forced to slow down and really just be with ourselves. And it's kind of nice, because it's a lot of less wasted energy that maybe would spend on doing things outside that I really wasn't as rewarding. And I rather almost just spend it inside and doing poetry and reading poetry. And I'm lucky that I have a really great relationship, and I'm married to my wife, so I'm lucky in that sense. But in some ways, I think there are definitely gifts that to be that we can learn from this experience of how we relate to ourselves and our what's inside of us.
Sarah, we're going to need to wrap up the show. We'd like to offer you some closing comments, whatever you'd like to share. And then if you could provide your social media connection so we can stay in touch with you, please.
Okay. I would say, just if you're curious about poetry and you've never tried it before, just give it a shot. I know it's easier said than done. I mean, I always get nervous what other people think of my poetry, but there's just so much to there's so many rewards to be had just from allowing yourself to write and seeing what comes, just in terms of your relationship to yourself. So even keeping a journal, I highly recommend, and just play with it. And there's a ton of people poetry is just not for, but that's probably not your audience. And then I actually have a website. It's www.whimsicalpoet.com, and I put some of my own poetry on there. And then I have guest poems, and then I have some classic poems. There's a whole bunch of resources. So it's whimsicalpoet.com. And then I have a Facebook page for that page that's called Whimsical Poet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my name is Sara Altman. So
thank you, Sarah, so much for being our guest poet.
Thank you so much. This has been really fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Thank you, everyone, so much for watching our poet interview today. Again, we wish you happy holidays and a joyous holiday season. Thank you again, Sarah, for being our guest poet. Thanks again for watching, everyone. And we'll talk soon on the next Poetry and Talk. Until then, be well and be blessed.
Bye.